While me and other Chicago Bulls fans have a lot of doubt around how good the Chicago Bulls are going to be this upcoming season, we cannot let that take away that the Bulls did have some pretty big major wins and steps forward this offseason. We're going to talk about what those were on today's episode. We're also going to look at one glaring flaw that the front office brought to this team this past offseason as well. And Elias Schuster has done a lot of the legwork at looking at the finer details of the Chicago Bulls schedule. We're going to break that down as well. All that plus more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host here, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today, y'all. So there's an interesting article on what the Bulls' biggest wins were this season. I only pointed out one. I'm going to add my own to it, but I wanted to take that step back. I know you guys know I'm very realistic as being a Bulls fan. I'm very honest, with my thoughts and ideas when it comes to the Chicago Bulls, and the fact that I do still look at this team, and I think this is going to be a team that struggles this upcoming year. The lack of defense, things like that, still kind of living in two worlds. But regardless of that, there were some pretty big and major steps in the right direction that the Chicago Bulls front office made this past offseason. The first one, finally making the decision to move off the Chicago Bulls core. That is a huge decision because we've talked about it, right? How when I had the episode, earlier in the week in which I broke down why the Chicago Bulls kind of cap situation and draft situation isn't as bad as what some people make it out to be, right? I think a lot of Bulls fans are still in this thinking that the Bulls have no draft assets, which we do. We only owe out one more first-round pick, and we got all their other first-round picks because of that, right? Then on top of the fact that the Chicago Bulls next season can have upwards of $50 million in cap space, right? Well, underneath the luxury tax. Now, the Josh Giddey signing is going to take away some of that, but if you are able to move Vooch, you're able to move Zach LaVine and not take back his full salary, you can even have more than that. And then future flexibility. The year after that, we're over $100 million beneath the luxury tax, and even further the year after. So the Bulls made the decision to move off this core at the right time, and I do not want to allow that to go overlooked. Had the Bulls re-signed DeMar DeRozan, which then they probably would have kept Alex Caruso, we would have had another 3 or 4 years of being right up against that luxury tax and not able to really add anything to the team and staying in the place where we're paying for a aging roster that just doesn't have a lot on it and not a lot of upside. Yeah, the Bulls may be bad for a year or two, right? Of course, they're hoping not to be that long, but they made the move to go younger at the right time to not strap themselves financially. Even after the Bulls theoretically give this contract extension to Josh Giddey, they still project to have cap flexibility over the next 2 or 3 years. And so, even with this extension of Kobe and Ayo Dosunmu coming at some point down the pipeline, they made the move at the right time. Now, of course, had the Bulls made that move earlier, decided on that at the trade deadline, they could have had much more assets. But still coming to the realization of let's not just settle for continually being mediocre and in the play-in. Let's make a decision to go younger, I think is something you have to put as far as in the positive side of what this team was able to go off of. Now, we can talk about what you got back for moving off DeMar DeRozan, Alex Caruso, and Andre Drummond. It isn't great, right? And you still have Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic on this roster, but that gets into my next positive for this Bulls team. I got to give them credit for the fact of not giving up any future assets just to come off Zach LaVine. It could have been easy. And as much as some Bulls fans think that this front office is making Zach LaVine the scapegoat, I don't agree with that thinking, but they could have gave up a first-round pick to move off Zach LaVine or something like that. I'm glad that this team stuck by their mindset of we don't want to give up any future assets to move off this core when we gave up too many assets to build this core, future assets to build this core. So, that's something that a lot of front offices, had they just been at the point of we just got to move off Zach LaVine. We don't want to have him back here. We're worried about what it does to the locker room. We just want to go ahead and clear that cap table. Let's go ahead and send out a future 2030 unprotected first-round pick. The Bulls didn't do that. Now, they only get credit for this as long as they don't. Like, do they end up caving in and giving up a future first or something like that? Now, here's what I'll say. If the young players on this team take a step and we look like we're not that far from being maybe even better than what we've been with the previous core, and then they give up a first because they look at it and say, well, now we have a younger core that's still contending for playoffs. That 2030 pick isn't going to be that bad to give up to get off this money, maybe, right? But I got to give them some credit for not giving up any other future assets. It could have been easy to do that, even not coming off the Portland pick, right? And again, that Portland pick is probably going to convey to 2 second-round picks. No, make no mistake about it. I don't see Portland contending for the playoffs anytime soon, right? But even then, considering that you gave up a lot of second-round picks, like you gave up 2 to trade for Julian Phillips, you got 2 back in the DeMar DeRozan trade. Even if that Portland pick does turn into 2 second-round picks, all right, we've actually had some success with second-round picks around here. So if that ends up being the case, all right, cool. That's even more assets still back for you, and you didn't give up a future first right now that's protected to do that. That takes, something to do. And make no mistake about it, Zach LaVine can still work with this team, right? And it may end up in a scenario where maybe Zach does end up wanting to stay. I don't think that's going to happen, right? I don't look at this situation and think that it's one that, it can be made to where it's cordial, but I don't think it can be saved. But maybe I'm wrong on that. But the fact that they didn't give up somebody who, as I've said many times before, has been top 10 in the NBA in scoring since 2019 and have to give up a first-round pick for that. To stick through the noise, right, and the narratives around trying to trade an asset when the asset is devalued. It's not as easy as what some people think. I know people look at it and say, well, they couldn't move Zach because nobody wanted Zach. No, there's always a way that you can entice a deal, right? You could have given up an unprotected first and maybe a protected first or whatever it is. The Bulls didn't do that. We are in the area where we need to be holding on to all of our future assets because where this team is right now, we're still waiting on that true superstar, and you don't get that by just hoping that players are going to, could a player extend to that? Yeah, let's hope so, right? But again, you got to do it, and you got to make the right decision. So that's something as well. I got to say that this front office did right this past offseason. The next one, getting Modest Bucilis at number 11. Now, some people are going to look at that and say, hey, Modest fell to them. Of course they were going to take them. And here's what I'll say. We can't act like that's a foregone conclusion that this front office is going to do something sensible. Yes, Bucilis did fall to the Chicago Bulls because of other teams, unfortunately, passing him up when he was projected to go in the top 5. It was a weaker draft, but getting a player that has one of the highest potentials in this draft, right? And that's what you're drafting for, is the highest potential. To get somebody who brings that, to me, you did well there. And the Bulls could have easily gone after more of a more size, right? A center. They could have reached on somebody to get a player in here that, theoretically could have brought in something that they were missing, right? Not to say that Modest Bucilis doesn't, but again, you got to look at that. So, overall, I look at the drafting of Bucilis, a player that has the type of mindset that you want to see from a young player. He has some really big flaws in his game right now. All rookies do, especially in this past class, right? But there are rumors around the Bulls, going after Devin Carter, Nikola Topic, right? Those would have been guys who, I would have brought something to the Bulls, but they went with the high upside pick to follow through what they did. Now, there's other high upside picks. They could have went Khalil Ware, which I think would have, most Bulls fans, especially with his performance in Summer League, would have still been favorable on having a young, dynamic center there, right? But the Bulls they made the right decision. And this is a front office that hasn't always made the clear decision. It was the right decision based on paper to draft Walker Kessler over Dalen Terry. After you just drafted some athletic wing players that were raw before, they did it again with Dalen Terry, right? They didn't do that here. They went out and got a player with extreme upside who is raw but has that superstar level upside. And at times where they didn't do the thing that kind of made the most sense, right? They try to think outside the box. So I got to give the front office credit for drafting Matas Bucilis and bringing him to this team and helping him add him to a core that's already going younger and that fits theoretically the play style that you're trying to go to. And so that's something that, again, this front office did right. And there was a lot of different scenarios in which they may have not made the right decision there to draft Modest Bucilis. Now, we got to see if you're going to put Modest in the right situations to develop him and extract the most talent out of that potential that's there with Bucilis. But, that's with any draft pick, right? So the Bulls also got to give them credit for this one, to set up themselves to be a solid player development team. Getting in Wes Unseld Jr., getting in Dan Craig, right? These are two they're two veteran coaches, right, who have been heads of player development, have developed players like Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr., Bam Adebayo, right? Like these coaches have done and worked with players that were trying to get to a certain that we're trying to get similar players to a certain extent now to. So, they kind of set this up. And when you go back and look at the Bulls, right? And how that initial thing that they did first was change the coaching staff, where a lot of people at that time, the more pessimistic Bulls fans were saying, yeah, but you haven't changed the roster. Then they started making changes to the roster when they could. And we got to see how it's going to work out long term. But they've started making moves. And again, that goes back to finally picking and choosing to change your direction. You got to get I'm going to give them a little bit of credit for that. And then lastly is giving the young players a chance to grow. You've now set yourself up where young players at almost every position are going to get an opportunity. Josh Giddey, 21 at point guard. Kobe White, yeah, he's a little bit older at 24 years old, but at the end of the day, he's still going into now his second season and of being a big-time part of your offensive game plan to start the season off. Zach LaVine at the 3. Zach is Zach, right? We know what the situation is there. Still got Patrick Williams at the 4. Other players behind him at the 4. You got Julian Phillips, Modest Bucilis, who's going to play 3/4. You went out and got Jalen Smith as well, who's another young player that still has some upside there. You still got Adama Sanogo here, right? You went and got Kenny Lofton Jr. While all these players are not going to work out, and all of them may not turn out to be anything more than some solid depth or rotational pieces for the Bulls, you've now set these young players up with a play style and an environment that's kind of better suited to get them. You still got old stalwarts and Zach LaVine, Nikola Vucevic, Torrey Craig, Javon Carter. Those guys are still here, but you've now kind of opened it up a little bit more. And the play style that the Bulls are theoretically going to play on paper. Now, if that does not come and Billy Donovan is still coaching the same old play style, we'll revisit this, but you've at least started putting in those building blocks to be different. And that's a big question in this as well, is how much is Billy Donovan going to hurt or help the development of these young pieces? I know my boy Winton Mahorn is already typing to say, well, do we trust Billy Donovan? And I get it. I can't blame him on that one. It is what it is. And that's a criticism that Billy Donovan has more than earned when you look at the way that he has coached this team at times. But overall, the front office has set up things. They're not done. That's why it's a rebuild. They're not done getting to the place where they need to get or putting everything in place that they need to extract the most out of it. But I got to give the Bulls credit. They've done some smart and solid decisions here this offseason. The bigger question is now, how do they continue to support those solid plays that they put the Bulls in? And the one negative, right, that I'm going to say, I talked a little bit about this on Locked on Bulls over there yesterday, is just that it's the continued concern over this front office ability to kind of future plan and project. Now, I gave them credit. It looks like, at least on paper by reading it and looking at the salary cap, that they thought about when they were going to move off this core as far as how that impacted their salary cap thing. They also have some future assets. But again, when you go to it that you lost Caruso, DeMar, and Andre Drummond, and you got nothing back for those guys other than Josh Giddey, 2 second-round picks, and Chris Duarte, there's, again, that concern there. While I like some of the pieces that they got, I understand getting 2 second-round picks, the fact that they weren't able to get the first-round pick that the San Antonio Spurs got because they were able to absorb Harrison Barnes, that they didn't think about that to get that additional first, a swap or whatever it ended up being. Of course, that goes to, again, the concern over this front office ability to kind of take a step back and kind of plan out things ahead. And that is a place as a front office, if you worry about your front office's kind of future outlook, it's hard to not to have some that to be a big kind of negative there for you, even with some of the good things that this Bulls front office has done this offseason. But you guys can let me know what you guys think down below. I want to hear from you guys on this one. What are some of the best things that the Chicago Bulls team did this offseason? And what's the biggest concern out of their moves or lack of decisions that they did this offseason heading into the 2024-25 season? Let me know all that down below. All right, with that said, let's go ahead and get into this next topic for today. And that is Elias Schuster over at Bleacher Nation looked at the Chicago Bulls schedule and pulled out some really good details in the schedule that I want to kind of bring out here. And the first one, he used Positive Residual, which is a advanced NBA and WNBA site I've never used before, but it's now in my repertoire, and it's a damn good site as well. So if you're kind of the advanced analytics and basketball nerd, Positive Residual, really good site there. But according to that, the Bulls hold the 13th toughest schedule in the season. Now, again, this can change over the course of the season. This right now kind of looks at things like rest advantage, miles traveled, things like that. And it comes up with the preseason strength of schedule. Now, this could change as teams' records change and their play style changes, and depending on the moves, this strength of schedule can change. But right now, the Bulls have the 13th hardest schedule in the NBA. When you look at some of the teams that have weaker strengths of schedule than the Chicago Bulls that may affect the, not necessarily tanking, but however that goes, is the Toronto Raptors, the Washington Wizards, the Detroit Pistons, and the Charlotte Hornets. Now, the Charlotte Hornets are a team that I have said before, I think if they can stay relatively healthy, or healthy for the most part, they're going to have a solid season. I think they're going to have an over 40-win season. But, that's what you look at for it. And those teams are all in the Cooper Flag sweepstakes. So you see that. And so that strength of schedule suggests that that the Chicago Bulls could have, because they have a harder schedule, they may have an easier chance of keeping their top 10 protected pick. But then let's get into some of the other fine details of the Bulls schedule. The Bulls have the third most games with rest advantage. That means that even with the Chicago Bulls having 13 back-to-backs this season, there are more times than not going to have the rest advantage, meaning they're going to have more rest than their opponents. The only teams that include more are the the Brooklyn Nets with 15, and the Golden State Warriors with 14. So Chicago Bulls are going to have a lot of rest this season, even though they are kind of in the higher end of back-to-backs this season. Then when you look at it, the Bulls play 16 games this season before they even play 2 straight games at home, November 22nd and 23rd. That's crazy. I didn't notice that when looking at the schedule. This comes completely from Elias Schuster. Great call out there. This is going to be the longest time that the Bulls go without having back-to-back home games since 1988 and 89, where they went 17 games before playing their first back-to-back games at home. That means that while the Bulls have the rest advantage over the course of the season, they're traveling a lot to start the season. We've already talked about how that first 16 games for the Bulls are tough. And the fact that throughout that, they're going that first 16 without playing back-to-back games at home, the road warrior aspect of that for the Bulls are going to be interesting to watch as well. 10 of the Chicago Bulls' first 14 games of the season come against teams that finished last season with a record of 500 or better. And then the last month of the season, over that game, the Bulls have a 6-game West Coast trip, which we already talked about. Again, that goes from March 14th to 24th. That's toward the end of the season. So the Bulls have a tough start of the season and a tough finish to the season. But that fact that the Bulls go that long without playing back-to-back games at home, and that's the longest stretch since 1988-89. Hey, Steve-O wasn't even born. I don't even think Bobby was born then. Like, parts of the team weren't even born to see that. That's crazy. So the Bulls schedule is a difficult schedule. So when you hear that the Bulls schedule is tough, and I was talking in the comment section to somebody where they were like, well, the Bulls schedule is only tough because people expect the Bulls to be weak. It's like, no, strength of schedule, there's a lot more that goes into that, and kind of the higher thinking things like the back-to-backs, the rest days, stuff like that. Things like having 16 games before you play a back-to-back game at home. So those type of things, it's going to be a tough schedule and a tough season for the Bulls. And ultimately, maybe that's not for the worse either way, right? With a tough schedule, you get to evaluate really where your team is and who digs in and has those big games when you need them the most. Also, it helps you separate yourself and know exactly where you stand. The fact that most of our games, the first 14 games of the 10 of our first 14 games of the season are against teams that were above 500 last year. Hey, listen, we're gonna have a lot of measuring stick games to start off the season for the Bulls, and it just is what it is when it comes down to it. But let's go ahead and move off that. Last topic of the day before we go for today comes down to this. I want to talk a little bit about Kobe White and Ayo Dosunmu. And the fact is that yesterday we talked about how the trade rumors and Vooch's comments on the trade rumors, has gotten some response from Bulls fans of calling him weak-minded, things like that. And again, Vooch was not just talking about himself. He was talking about it affected the team. Vooch is a straight shooter. And sometimes with being a straight shooter, it comes with saying things that are difficult to say and admit. Now, the one thing that we're doing here that I want to turn this around to is that it's happening again. And with Kobe White and Ayo Dosunmu. And I think it's going to be important to see how they deal with this, right? Kobe White is a player that, listen, he's been in trade rumors since 2021-22, where a lot of Bulls fans wanted to see him move for a 4 because they thought he was redundant on this roster. Ayo Dosunmu, not so much, right? They had some Bulls fans, of course, after how his second season ended that were kind of more ready to let Ayo walk in the offseason. I'm glad the Bulls didn't do that. But trade rumors are going to be a thing. And the ultimate thing is, and you guys know, I've over the last week or so talked a lot about the fact that I don't think that the Bulls should be looking to move Kobe White or Ayo Dosunmu, especially just not the excuse that some Bulls fans give of, oh, they're not superstar level players. I don't give a fuck about that. There are players that you're drafted here and that are on reasonable contracts, and that's not to say that they're untouchable either. I think that people have the conversation between oh, you either have to move them now or you're trying to say they're untouchable. No, the truth is in the middle, is that unless there's something that presents itself or that you go after and get in the type of deal that it drastically improves your team, but you have to move one of those players to do it, I don't think that you move. And I went over the scenarios a couple of episodes ago that could end up in Kobe White or Ayo Dosunmu eventually being moved, right? I've went over those scenarios. It could be that maybe neither one takes a step. Maybe that when the Bulls do keep their top 10 pick and the best player on the board is a shooting guard, maybe that brings some change about, right? Maybe you do, when it comes down to the extension, the team isn't where it is and you need even more assets to plan even further out for the future, maybe then. But I don't think that this mindset of just moving on from Kobe and Ayo just because they aren't star level players yet, or maybe ever become that, is sound to me. I understand it. I don't agree with it, right? And so now you're having a new set of trade rumors, of course, still around Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic, but it seems like the next wave of trade rumors for the Bulls are going to be Kobe White and Ayo Dosunmu. Between now and when they sign their next extension for the Bulls, it seems like their names are going to be in a lot of trade rumors. Now, trade talks, I don't think that their names have actually been in very many trade talks. It's mainly just rumors from writers trying to find an angle, some Bulls fans, things like that. And I think ultimately when it comes down to it, that's just part of the game of basketball. And there's always going to be, hell, there were trade rumors around Zach LaVine. I remember it. Most people may not. The moment we traded for Zach in that Jimmy Butler trade, there were some people saying the Bulls are going to turn around and look to flip Zach LaVine. That just is what it is. It's the nature of the business. So, as one thing that I like to do here, is I like to separate the narrative from the reality. And as we go forward into the season, I'll be continuing to doing that. But that's my thoughts, guys. I love you guys so much, man. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns. BullsCentralPod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, but that is because of you lovely and beautiful people. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.